I knew today would change my life, but I didn't know it would be this dangerous. Standing outside Ashford Enterprises' glass building on my first day as an intern, my hands were slick with nervous sweat. Being an Omega in the corporate world wasn't easy, especially when your boss was an alpha, and not just any alpha but Ryland Ashford, famous for his ice-cold reputation. But when I stepped into his office, something inside me activated, that strange ability I'd kept hidden for the past 5 years. Suddenly a voice echoed in my mind, clear and disturbing. That scent, wild honey and midnight rain. Damn, my wolf recognizes it. How do I control this? I froze in shock. It was Ryland's voice, but his lips hadn't moved at all. His expression remained hard as granite, gray eyes scanning me like I was some kind of experiment. "You're Julian Case?" he asked in a flat, emotionless tone. "Why, yes, sir," I managed, desperately trying to keep my voice steady. But in my head, his other voice thundered again. "My wolf is going crazy for him. This Omega is completely different. I want to stay away, but no, that's impossible now." The entire day was torture. Outwardly, Ryland maintained his Ice King persona, giving me tight deadlines and brutally cold instructions. But inside his mind, a dangerous storm raged. Every time I approached his desk with quarterly reports or files, I heard his raw, unfiltered thoughts. "If I touch him even once. No. Stay in control, Ryland. But that intoxicating scent, my wolf wants to claim him right now." I didn't know what to do with this situation. This ability, this curse, that let me hear other alphas and Omega's deepest inner thoughts, had never been this overwhelming. Because Ryland's mind wasn't just filled with professional thoughts. His primal wolf was also speaking continuously, raw and completely possessive. When evening came and the sun began setting, Ryland called me into his private office. "Case, starting tomorrow your entire schedule is changing. You're being moved to the position of my executive assistant, meaning you'll work directly with me only," he said, deliberately avoiding eye contact. But his inner voice was screaming, "Need to keep him close at all times. Can't let him go now. My wolf wants to claim him desperately. No, this is wrong for my position." "Sir, I'm ready," I said carefully. "Good. Dismissed for today." He cut me off sharply, and I walked out with my heart pounding violently. When I got home, a scary realization hit me. This wasn't just a simple corporate job. This was a dangerously addictive game I'd already become involved in. The weight of what happened settled on me slowly. I'd spent 5 years perfecting the art of blocking out other people's thoughts, building mental walls so thick that most voices became mere whispers. But Ryland's mind was different. It broke through every barrier I had like they were made of paper. His thoughts weren't just loud. They were vivid, detailed, almost tangible. I could feel the struggle in them, the war between his professional composure and his wolf's primal demands. It terrified me because I'd never encountered an alpha whose inner voice resonated this powerfully. Most alphas I'd worked with had controlled, measured thoughts even in their private moments. But Ryland, his mind was chaos wrapped in discipline, a volcano constantly threatening to erupt. I sat on my apartment couch, replaying the day's events, the way his jaw had tightened when I'd handed him the financial projections. The brief moment his fingers had brushed mine when taking a folder, sending electricity up my arm while his thoughts screamed about my scent. The dangerous flash of amber in his eyes when another alpha from accounting had smiled at me in the hallway. Every detail was burned into my memory. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept wondering what tomorrow would bring, working directly under him in close proximity. The thought both thrilled and terrified me, because despite the danger, despite knowing this could end badly, there was something magnetic about Ryland Ashford. Not just his commanding presence or sharp intelligence, but the vulnerability hidden beneath his cold exterior. The alpha who fought so hard against his own nature, who seemed genuinely afraid of what his wolf might do. That contradiction drew me in like nothing else ever had. I'd dated other alphas before, safe, predictable ones who followed social norms and never pushed boundaries. But Ryland was different, dangerous. And tomorrow I'd be spending 8 hours a day in his private office, breathing the same air, drowning in his scent, hearing every unfiltered thought that crossed his brilliant, tormented mind. I pulled my blanket tighter, trying to ignore the way my body already responded to just the memory of his presence. This was going to be complicated. This was going to hurt. But somehow I knew I wouldn't trade it for anything. The next day was even stranger. Ryland had moved me into his ultra-private office, where only the two of us worked throughout the day. And this suffocating proximity was driving me mentally crazy. His overwhelming scent, dark cedarwood mixed with something wild and untamed, filled every breath I took. And his unfiltered inner voice played continuously in my head like a broken record. Don't let him get this close. But I'm the one who brought him here deliberately. What exactly is this Omega doing to my control? I desperately tried focusing on my laptop screen. But then Ryland stood and moved dangerously close to my desk. This financial report has critical errors that investors will notice, he said in a low voice, leaning so close that his warm breath touched my exposed neck. I felt an involuntary shiver run through me, but in his mind a completely different story was unfolding violently. If I mark him right here, right now, no. Control yourself, Ryland. But that intoxicating scent. My wolf literally wants to break free. Sorry, sir, I'll fix it immediately. I stammered badly, my fingers trembling slightly. He hummed deeply, finally straightening up. But when he returned to his leather chair, his dangerously possessive inner voice came again. How much longer can I realistically maintain control? This Omega is clearly destined for me. I can feel it so strongly. During lunch break, I desperately headed to the cafeteria, trying to escape that intense suffocating tension. But even there, I found no peace. Two arrogant senior alphas, Roger and Kaysen, deliberately approached me, both smirking knowingly. So you're the lucky new Omega working directly with the big boss? Roger said mockingly, his hungry eyes shamelessly roaming over me. Pretty lucky situation you've got. Kaysen moved uncomfortably closer, adding, but if you ever get bored, feel free to let us know, sweetheart. I felt extremely uncomfortable, instinctively stepping back. But then a dangerously cold voice literally roared through the entire cafeteria. Case. My office. Right now. Ryland stood in the doorway, his face completely expressionless, but his deadly aura was absolutely murderous. Roger and Kaysen immediately backed off, terrified. When I nervously followed him into his office, he forcefully locked the door and turned to face me furiously. Stay completely away from those two, always, he said in a dangerously low, threatening voice, his eyes flashing bright amber, his unleashed wolf. Sir, I wasn't. This is an order, Julian. He cut me off harshly, using my first name for the first time ever. But in his mind, a violent scream was raging. If anyone else touches him, I'll personally break their hands. He's exclusively mine. Why am I becoming this desperately possessive? I gulped nervously, unable to speak. Understand? He demanded. Why, yes. He stared at me for one intense second, his jaw tightly clenched, then abruptly turned toward the door. But right before leaving, he whispered so softly I could barely hear properly, "Stay safe always, Julian. Please." And then he quickly left, leaving me completely breathless and hopelessly confused about everything. The afternoon dragged on in tense silence. Ryland buried himself in conference calls and contract reviews, but I could feel his attention on me constantly. Every time I shifted in my chair, every time I tucked my hair behind my ear, every small movement registered in his peripheral vision. His thoughts confirmed it. Stop watching him. You're being obvious. But I need to know he's safe. That he's here. The possessence in his mental voice should have frightened me. Any rational Omega would recognize the warning signs. An alpha losing control, fixating obsessively, struggling with his wolf's demands. But instead of fear, I felt something else entirely. Wanted. Protected. Seen. For the first time in my life, someone's complete attention was focused solely on me, not as an obligation or casual interest, but as something essential. Around 3 in the afternoon, Ryland stood abruptly. I need coffee. Don't leave this office while I'm gone, he said curtly before walking out. The moment the door closed, I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were shaking. I pressed my palms flat against the cool desk surface, trying to ground myself. This was insane. I was falling for my boss, an alpha who could barely control himself around me, whose wolf saw me as a mate. Every professional boundary was blurring dangerously. When Ryland returned carrying 2 coffee cups, he placed one on my desk without a word. I stared at it in surprise. He'd remembered exactly how I took my coffee from the break room this morning. "Thank you, sir," I said softly. He didn't respond, just returned to his chair. But his thoughts betrayed him. I shouldn't care about these small things, but seeing him comfortable, taken care of, it matters. We worked in companionable silence for the next hour, and slowly the tension began to ease. I caught myself sneaking glances at him when he was focused on his screen, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his fingers moved across the keyboard with precise efficiency, the slight furrow between his brows when he concentrated. He was devastatingly handsome in a cold, untouchable way. Except he wasn't untouchable anymore. Not to me, because I'd heard his thoughts, felt his struggle, glimpsed the vulnerability he showed no one else. When 5 o'clock arrived, Ryland spoke without looking up from his laptop. "You can leave for the day, Julian." "Good work." "Thank you, sir. Have a good evening." As I gathered my things and headed for the door, his final thought reached me clearly: tomorrow, and the day after. And every day, I need him here. I walked to the elevator with my heart racing, knowing that tomorrow would be even more intense, even more dangerous. And despite every logical reason to be afraid, I could barely wait. The tension throughout the entire week gradually became mentally unbearable. Ryland maintained his strictly Ice King demeanor during the day. But late at night, when everyone left the building, I accidentally started hearing his raw inner thoughts whenever he sat alone in his dimly lit office. One particular night, I was working unusually late on an important presentation, when I clearly heard his tormented mind. "I desperately want to protect him from everything, but realistically, I'm the biggest potential danger to him. My wolf is dangerously spiraling out of control. If I accidentally mark him during his heat." Suddenly his heavy office door opened abruptly, and he stepped out, concerned, his intense eyes immediately finding me. "Julian, why haven't you gone home yet?" he demanded. "Sir, this important presentation is due tomorrow morning with a strict deadline. Stop immediately and go home safely," he said in an unexpectedly sharp, forceful tone. But in his desperate mind, "Don't stay here dangerously alone late at night. If some malicious alpha finds you." "No, I'll never let that happen." I silently packed my bag, deeply confused and increasingly frustrated about everything. When I finally started leaving, he suddenly grabbed my wrist firmly, stopping me. "Julian." His strong grip felt warm, almost burning. "Always take proper care of yourself outside." And then, a dangerous flicker. His gray eyes flashed intensely amber. His primal wolf was surfacing. I slowly nodded, completely breathless, and somehow managed to leave. During the entire journey home, my mind was a complete chaotic mess. This mysterious ability, this painful curse, had never been this emotionally painful. Honestly, because I'd started genuinely falling for Ryland deeply, despite everything being so complicated. Behind his carefully maintained cold exterior was a vulnerable, struggling alpha who desperately tried controlling himself continuously, protecting me from his dangerous wolf, and that irresistibly attracted me magnetically. This situation was dangerously explosive. Clearly, the next morning when I nervously arrived at the office, I received an unexpected call from HR. "Mr. Case, you're officially accompanying Mr. Ashford on an exclusive business trip, Atlanta, for 2 complete days, mandatory." My anxious heart completely sank. Alone. Just with Ryland intensely. When I went to his luxurious office to nervously confirm, he was already perfectly prepared, his expensive suit impeccable, his handsome face carefully unreadable. "Pack light, efficiently. We're leaving tomorrow morning sharp via private jet," he said professionally. But in his conflicted mind, 2 full days, just exclusively us. This is definitely a dangerous mistake. Clearly, but how can I realistically refuse? I selfishly want to keep him desperately close. "Sir, can I? Is there a serious problem?" He coolly raised an eyebrow challengingly. "No, absolutely not, sir." "Excellent. Good." He decisively closed his file and curtly dismissed me. But when I nervously walked out, I heard his final terrified thought clearly: "In Atlanta, completely alone. I'm dangerously testing my iron control seriously. If I ultimately lose control, then God help us both." The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety and anticipation. I went home and stared at my suitcase, wondering what to pack. What did you bring on a business trip where the real danger wasn't the meetings but the man you'd be trapped with? I chose professional clothes, Comfortable shoes, basic toiletries, nothing special, nothing that screamed I was hoping for something to happen. Because I wasn't hoping. Or maybe I was. I couldn't tell anymore. My feelings were too tangled, too complicated. That night, sleep evaded me completely. I kept imagining scenarios, sitting next to Ryland on the private jet, sharing meals, potentially sharing hotel space. The proximity would be constant, inescapable. And his wolf was already barely contained within the controlled environment of the office. What would happen when we were truly alone, away from witnesses and workplace protocols? Part of me whispered that this was a terrible idea, that I should fake an illness and avoid the trip entirely. But a stronger part, the part that had listened to his vulnerable thoughts all week, that had seen past his cold mask, wanted desperately to go. Wanted to see what happened when the walls between us finally crumbled completely. Morning arrived too quickly. I met Ryland at the private airstrip at 6 sharp, both of us maintaining professional distance as we boarded the sleek jet. The interior was luxurious, cream leather seats, polished wood accents, every detail screaming wealth and power. We took seats across from each other and Ryland immediately opened his laptop, building that familiar wall between us. But I could hear his thoughts. So close in this confined space, his scent is everywhere. I can't escape it. Don't want to escape it. This is torture. The flight to Atlanta took 2 hours. For the entire duration, Ryland worked without speaking a single word to me, his jaw tight with concentration. But every so often, his eyes would flick up from his screen, meeting mine for half a second before quickly looking away. Each time, his thoughts would spike. Stop staring. You're being too obvious. But he looks nervous. Is he afraid? Afraid of me? I wasn't afraid, not exactly. I was terrified. Yes, but not of him. I was terrified of what I wanted, of how badly I wanted to reach across that small space and touch him. Hear him say my name without the professional distance, see his controlled expression finally break. When we landed, a car was waiting to take us to the hotel. The driver loaded our bags while Ryland and I sat in tense silence in the back seat. Atlanta's downtown buildings rose around us as we drove, but I barely noticed the scenery. All my attention was focused on the man beside me, on the way his fingers drummed against his knee, on the tight set of his shoulders. The meetings are tomorrow afternoon, Ryland finally said, his voice carefully neutral. Tonight is you can explore the city or rest at the hotel, whichever you prefer. What will you do, sir? The question slipped out before I could stop it. He turned to look at me then, really look at me, and for a moment his professional mask slipped. His gray eyes were dark, intense, filled with something that made my breath catch. I'll try to stay away from you, he said quietly, honestly, because if I don't, Julian, I don't trust what will happen. The confession hung between us, raw and dangerous, as the car pulled up to our hotel, and I realized that this trip wasn't going to be about business at all. It was going to be a test of his control, of my resistance, of whether we could continue pretending that what was happening between us could be ignored forever. The Atlanta trip was an emotional disaster before it even truly began. Inside the luxury private flight, we sat in first-class reclining seats with uncomfortable space between us. Yet Ryland strategically buried himself in work on his laptop, deliberately not speaking a single word directly to me. But in his troubled mind, a violent storm raged relentlessly, so dangerously close physically. His intoxicating scent is everywhere here. I'm literally suffocating. But simultaneously it feels good. This is completely wrong morally. When we finally arrived at the luxurious downtown hotel, the smiling receptionist said professionally, Mr. Ashford, your exclusive presidential suite is completely ready, one master bedroom as specifically requested, sir. My heart literally stopped. Wait, one bedroom? I immediately looked sharply at Ryland. He gave the receptionist a deadly glare. That's clearly a mistake. 2 separate rooms were explicitly booked. Extremely sorry, sir, our updated records show only one presidential suite available. It was an emergency last-minute booking. Fine. Whatever. Ryland cut her off harshly, his jaw dangerously tight. In his raging mind, this was subconsciously planned. But why am I consciously torturing myself willingly, alone in one room? This is realistically impossible to survive. Upon nervously entering the expensive suite, I clearly saw it, only one massive king-sized bed, inviting and dangerous. Ryland immediately declared firmly, "I'll sleep on the couch, obviously." "Sir, you really don't have to. This is absolutely final, Julian." He cut me off authoritatively. He quickly removed his expensive blazer and immediately escaped into the bathroom. The suite was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Atlanta's glittering skyline. Modern furnishings in cream and gold. A separate living area with that couch Ryland had claimed. But all I could focus on was that bed, and the fact that we'd be spending the night mere feet from each other. I unpacked my small suitcase mechanically, hanging up my clothes for tomorrow's meeting, trying not to think about how his scent already filled the entire space. When Ryland emerged from the bathroom 20 minutes later, he'd changed into casual clothes, dark jeans and a fitted black shirt that somehow made him look more intimidating than his business suit. He avoided looking at me as he settled on the couch with his laptop again, building that familiar wall of work between us. I wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but words failed me. Instead, I retreated to the bathroom myself, taking a long shower and hoping the hot water would calm my racing thoughts. It did. When I came out wearing comfortable sleep clothes, Ryland's eyes flicked to me briefly before returning to his screen. But not before I caught his thought, "He looks softer like this. More vulnerable. I need to stay focused." I settled onto the bed with my own laptop, pretending to review documents while actually watching him from the corner of my eye. The distance between us felt both too much and not enough. Hours passed in tense silence. Around 9, Ryland ordered room service, a full dinner spread that he insisted we share at the suite's dining table. We ate without much conversation, the clink of silverware against plates the only sound. But his thoughts were loud. "This feels too domestic, too much like what I want, but can't have. Sharing meals, sharing space, dangerous territory." After dinner, I tried to settle in for sleep, but the massive bed felt too empty, too cold. I could hear Ryland shifting on the couch, clearly uncomfortable, his tall frame not fitting properly on the cushions. Around midnight, I heard him get up and move to the windows, standing there looking out at the city. I should have pretended to sleep, but instead I sat up. "Can't sleep either?" I asked softly. He turned, surprise flickering across his face. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. I've been awake." For a moment we just looked at each other across the dimly lit room. Then Ryland sighed. "This was a mistake, bringing you here." "Was it?" I challenged. "We both know what's happening between us, Ryland. Pretending won't make it go away." "It has to go away," he said firmly. "I'm your boss. You're my employee. The power dynamic alone makes this impossible. What if I don't care about that?" His eyes flashed amber briefly. "You should care. I could ruin your career, Julian. One wrong move and what? You'd fire me? Blacklist me?" I stood up, moving closer. "You won't do that. How can you be so sure?" "Because I hear your thoughts. Remember?" I lied smoothly, using my ability as cover. "I know what you really want." Unexpectedly then, the important board meeting got suddenly cancelled due to unforeseen circumstances, leaving us both awkwardly trapped in the suite together. Painfully awkward silence dominated the room. I desperately turned on the TV, trying hard to distract myself mentally, while Ryland silently worked mechanically on his laptop. Then suddenly, without any warning, the lights went completely out. Total blackout everywhere. "Damn it," Ryland muttered harshly from somewhere in the darkness. I immediately grabbed my phone, urgently turning on the flashlight, but exactly then a strange, intense feeling suddenly came over my body. Unmistakable heat. Early preheat symptoms, clearly. No, this couldn't be happening now. But my distinctive scent began rapidly changing, growing dangerously strong and unbearably sweet. Ryland instantly froze completely. His gray eyes violently flashed, bright amber glowing in the darkness. "Julianne, is your heat starting unexpectedly?" he asked hoarsely. "I'm completely fine." I desperately lied, trying hard to control my irregular breathing. But he was already standing decisively, purposefully moving toward me. "Julianne, you clearly don't understand how serious this is. Your overpowering scent. My uncontrolled wolf." He tightly clenched his fist, desperately fighting for slipping control. In his mind, a primal roar raged violently. Claim him completely. Right now, immediately. He's exclusively yours, destined. No. Control yourself. But this addictive scent, I can't realistically stop. Ryland, please, I whispered shakily, instinctively stepping backward. But he moved dangerously closer, his glowing eyes intensely locked on mine. I won't deliberately hurt you, ever, he said in a rough, low voice, clearly struggling with every word. But I can't physically stay away from you either. The air between us crackled with tension, with need, with the dangerous pull of biology and something deeper. I could feel heat spreading through my body, my omega instincts screaming at me to submit, to let this alpha claim me. And part of me, a growing, insistent part, wanted exactly that. Wanted to stop fighting, stop pretending, stop denying what we both felt. Ryland took another step closer, and I could see the war happening behind his eyes. His human control battling his wolf's primal demands. His hand lifted slightly, as if he wanted to touch me but was forcing himself not to. Tell me to leave, he said, his voice strained. Tell me to go, Julienne, because if you don't, I don't know what will happen. But I couldn't say those words. My throat closed around them, refusing to release what would have been a lie. Because I didn't want him to leave. I wanted him to stay, to close that final distance between us, to stop fighting what felt inevitable. The moment stretched, heavy and electric, both of us trembling on the edge of something irrevocable. His hand reached out, fingers barely grazing my cheek, and I leaned into the touch involuntarily. Julienne, he breathed, and my name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a curse combined. And then suddenly, unexpectedly, the lights came back on, and that intense moment abruptly shattered. Ryland immediately stepped back forcefully, breathing extremely hard, his eyes still flashing amber. I need to leave right now, he barely managed to say, and he urgently fled the suite, leaving me violently shaking and hopelessly confused about everything that had just happened. I stood there alone in the too bright suite, my body still trembling with preheat symptoms, my mind reeling from what had almost occurred. The door had slammed shut behind Ryland, and I could still feel the ghost of his presence. The way his scent had mixed with mine in those charged moments, creating something intoxicating and dangerous. I stumbled to the bed and collapsed onto it, pressing my face into the cool pillow, trying to regulate my breathing and calm the fire still burning through my veins. What was I doing? This was my boss, an alpha who could barely control himself around me, whose wolf saw me as destined mate. This violated every professional boundary, every rule of workplace conduct that had been drilled into me since accepting this internship. But none of that mattered to my heart, or to my omega instincts that recognized Ryland as something more than just an alpha, as someone fundamentally meant for me in ways I couldn't fully explain or rationalize. I grabbed my phone and almost called him, almost begged him to come back, but stopped myself at the last second with trembling fingers hovering over his contact. He needed space desperately. We both did. Needed time to think clearly without the overwhelming biological pull clouding our judgment. The preheat symptoms were manageable for now. This was just the early stage, the warning before the real heat would hit in approximately 3 or 4 days. I could control it with suppressants and willpower. I had to control it, had to prove I wasn't just some omega ruled entirely by biology and instinct. Ryland literally stayed out the entire night deliberately. When he finally returned the next morning looking completely exhausted, his gray eyes were bloodshot red, his handsome face utterly drained of color and energy. I carefully said nothing about his absence, but in his tortured mind, I clearly heard. All night, I desperately tried to maintain control, walking the city streets until dawn, but his haunting scent lingered in my clothes. My memory, I'm seriously going insane. This omega will completely destroy me eventually. The important client meeting surprisingly went exceptionally well professionally, with Ryland delivering a flawless presentation that secured a major contract, but the unbearable tension between us remained absolutely suffocating throughout. Every accidental brush of hands when passing documents, every shared glance across the conference table felt charged with unspoken words and unfinished moments. On the private flight back to New York, Ryland finally spoke hesitantly after an hour of loaded silence. Julienne, you should realistically transfer immediately to another department. Clearly, my hopeful heart painfully sank into my stomach. I whispered in genuine shock, unable to believe what I was hearing. To another suitable department, somewhere safe away from me. That would be absolutely best long-term for both of us, he said in a deliberately flat, emotionless tone that didn't match the turmoil I could sense, his gray eyes carefully avoiding mine as he stared out the airplane window. But in his breaking mind, a violent scream raged desperately. I'm forcing him away intentionally, because I realistically can't control myself anymore around him, but this decision will emotionally destroy me completely, rip me apart. I won't leave willingly, I said unexpectedly firmly, surprising both of us with the steel in my voice. He finally looked at me shocked, his eyes dangerously dark with suppressed emotion. Why would you deliberately stay when you know how dangerous this situation is? He demanded roughly. Because I hesitated nervously, my heart pounding. Should I honestly tell him everything running through my mind and heart? Because I genuinely want to work here at Ashford Enterprises. Specifically with you, not anyone else. For several intense seconds, heavy silence filled the luxurious cabin uncomfortably, the only sound the quiet hum of jet engines. Then he finally gave a slow, reluctant nod that seemed to cost him something. All right then. Stay. But in his conflicted mind, this is clearly a dangerous mistake that will end badly, but I'm hopelessly selfish when it comes to him. I can't let him go, ever. Even knowing I should. The rest of the flight passed in tense quiet, both of us pretending to work while acutely aware of every breath, every movement the other made. When we finally landed in New York, the familiar skyline greeting us, nothing had been resolved, but everything had somehow shifted imperceptibly between us. We were done pretending this was just a professional relationship complicated by biology. This was something deeper, more terrifying, infinitely more real. Immediately after returning to the office, everything noticeably became strange and different gradually over the following days. Ryland deliberately started creating conscious distance from me, physically avoiding contact, scheduling meetings separately, communicating primarily through email rather than face-to-face conversations. But in his unfiltered thoughts that I couldn't escape hearing, I was constantly present, obsessively occupying his every waking moment. Then one tense Friday evening, after everyone had successfully left the building for the weekend, I was quietly alone in the cabin, carefully organizing important files and preparing reports for Monday. Suddenly Ryland entered without knocking, his handsome face unusually tense and drawn, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd been sleeping as poorly as I had. Julian, there's something critical you need to know honestly, something I can't keep hiding anymore, he said without preamble. I looked at him nervously, my anxious heart pounding violently against my ribs. What is it? I barely managed to ask. He took a deep, hesitant breath as if steeling himself. My primal wolf has officially recognized you as my destined mate completely and irrevocably. There's no changing that, no controlling it. Deafening silence filled the room, broken only by the distant hum of building ventilation. I realistically know this sounds absolutely crazy, like something from old legends. He quickly continued, words tumbling out. But since you arrived at this company, since that very first day, I haven't been able to control myself properly around you. And in Atlanta specifically, your unexpected preheat confirmed everything conclusively in ways I can't deny. I gulped nervously, my mouth suddenly dry. Ryland, I'm obviously not forcing you into anything, or pressuring you, he immediately said quickly, almost desperately. But I needed to be brutally honest with you about what's happening, what this means. I'll desperately try to stay away from you professionally if that's what you want. But realistically, no, I interrupted firmly, the word coming out stronger than I felt. He looked at me completely shocked, frozen in place. What do you mean exactly? I don't want you to deliberately stay away from me, I said clearly, my voice shaking but determined. Because I genuinely feel something powerful for you too, deeply and completely. His gray eyes widened in surprise and something that looked like desperate hope. Then extremely slowly, he carefully approached me, moving like he was afraid I might bolt or disappear, his warm hand eventually reaching up to gently cup my face tenderly. Julian, are you completely sure about this? Do you understand what you're saying? He searched my eyes intensely. Yes, I whispered softly, but with absolute certainty. And then finally he kissed me, surprisingly soft at first, unexpectedly gentle but absolutely full of restrained passion that had been building for weeks. The kiss deepened naturally, and I felt something fundamental shift between us, like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. This wasn't just physical attraction or biological compatibility speaking. This was conscious choice. I was choosing him deliberately, and he was choosing me despite all the massive complications and serious consequences we both knew would follow. When we finally broke apart breathlessly, both gasping for air, Ryland rested his forehead lovingly against mine, his hands still cradling my face. This will be extremely complicated moving forward, clearly, he warned honestly, his voice rough. I know that completely, I replied sincerely, covering his hands with mine. But I'm ready for whatever comes. He pulled me into a tight embrace then, holding me firmly against his chest, and I could hear and feel his heartbeat racing as fast as mine. Could sense through our proximity how much this moment meant to him. For the first time since meeting him, Ryland's turbulent mind was blessedly quiet. No fighting his wolf, no internal battle for control, just peaceful acceptance and contentment. We stood like that for several long minutes, neither wanting to break the precious moment or return to harsh reality. But eventually, the real world intruded as it always does. We need to be extremely careful at work going forward, Ryland said quietly, reluctantly pulling back slightly to look at me seriously. The board has very strict policies about workplace relationships, especially between direct supervisors and their subordinates. I understand the risks, I acknowledged, though the thought of hiding what we had, of pretending indifference made my chest physically ache. We'll figure out a solution together, he promised firmly, whatever it takes. That word, together, sent warmth flooding through my entire body. I wasn't alone in this terrifying situation anymore. Whatever massive challenges lay ahead in our path, we'd face them united as partners, as equal. Ryland insisted on walking me to my car that night, a gesture that felt both protective and intimate, his hand occasionally brushing against mine. Before I got in, he caught my hand briefly, interlacing our fingers. "Text me immediately when you get home safe," he said, and though it was a simple request, it felt like so much more than casual concern, like proof that this was real, that he genuinely cared beyond just physical attraction or biological drives. I drove home in a complete daze, my mind continuously replaying every moment of that kiss, that honest confession, that embrace. When I finally got to my apartment, I immediately texted him as requested, "Home safe." His response came within seconds. "Good. Sleep well, Julian. Dream of me." I stared at those words, smiling like an idiot, my heart swelling, before finally heading to bed. Sleep didn't come easily though, my mind too active. I kept thinking about what came next, about how we'd navigate this new complicated territory. Monday morning would inevitably bring new challenges, maintaining strict professionalism while everything between us had changed so fundamentally and irrevocably. But for tonight, I let myself simply be happy, purely content. For the first time in my entire life, I'd found someone who saw me completely, not just the Omega or the employee but me, Julian Case, with all my complications and secrets and flaws. And miraculously, impossibly, he wanted me anyway, chose me deliberately. The next few weeks proved emotionally and mentally challenging, not specifically because of our relationship itself, but because office politics and rigid corporate hierarchy deliberately created serious complications at every turn. We were maintaining a carefully secret relationship, and the suffocatingly claustrophobic nature of constantly hiding our true feelings wore heavily on both of us. But Ryland remained fiercely protective of me, dangerously possessive in subtle ways, his alpha wolf's direct influence clearly showing through despite his attempts at control. One crucial day during an important quarterly board meeting, a manipulative rival alpha named Sterling Reed deliberately gave me an openly inappropriate suggestion in front of several witnesses. "Case, you're surprisingly talented for such a young Omega. Realistically, there might be significantly better opportunities and advancement potential in my department naturally," he said with a calculated smirk, his hungry eyes shamelessly roaming over my body in a way that made my skin crawl. Ryland instantly tensed dangerously beside me, his entire body going rigid. In his raging mind, a violent roar raged furiously, If he deliberately touches Julienne inappropriately, I'll personally break his hand immediately and publicly, consequences be damned. After the tense meeting finally ended, Ryland immediately urgently called me into his private cabin and forcefully locked the door behind us. His expression thunderous. Julienne, stay completely away from Sterling Reed, always. That's a direct order, he commanded authoritatively. I know, Ryland. I'm being extremely careful around him, I assured him calmly, trying to ease his visible agitation. But he was visibly upset, restlessly pacing the length of his office like a caged predator. No, you don't properly understand the severity. His malicious intention toward you is crystal clear to anyone paying attention. And my wolf, I can't fully control it anymore when someone threatens what's mine. I firmly grabbed his hand mid-pace, stopping his anxious movement and forcing him to focus on me. Ryland, please breathe deeply. I'm exclusively yours and only yours. No one else matters. His intense eyes noticeably softened at my words, the amber fading back to gray, and he pulled me into a desperately tight hug, both protective and possessive. I can't lose you, Julienne. Not ever. Not to anyone, he said against my hair. You're not losing me to anyone, I whispered gently and reassuringly, holding him just as tightly. But cruel fate had other plans, unfortunately. One stressful week later, Sterling deliberately filed a formal complaint with HR, completely fabricated false allegations, claiming Ryland was openly biased toward me and showed blatant favoritism that violated company policy. A serious official investigation immediately began. And suddenly our carefully guarded secret relationship came under uncomfortable public scrutiny. Miss Case, unfortunately you'll need to temporarily transfer to another floor during the investigation period. The HR head formally informed me in a tense meeting. My hopeful heart sank painfully, dropping like a stone. Ryland's reaction was absolutely brutal too. In his furious mind I clearly heard, this is all Sterling's deliberate planning and manipulation. Obviously trying to separate us. He wants to forcefully drive Julian away from me. No, I absolutely won't let this happen ever. But professionally and legally, we realistically had to comply helplessly with HR's directive or risk making everything worse. For 2 extremely painful weeks we barely saw each other properly or spoke beyond professional necessity. Only stolen glances across crowded hallways, desperate secret text messages sent late at night when loneliness became unbearable. The forced separation was pure agony for both of us. Every single day without him felt fundamentally incomplete, wrong on a visceral level. I'd gotten so used to his constant presence, his distinctive scent, the quiet comfort and safety of working beside him daily. Now my new temporary desk felt completely foreign and cold, surrounded by indifferent strangers who didn't know me, didn't care about me beyond basic professional courtesy. I threw myself desperately into work, trying hard to distract from the persistent ache in my chest, but nothing actually helped ease the pain. At night I'd lie awake reading and rereading Ryland's messages obsessively. This separation won't last forever. We'll find a way through this. I miss you terribly. Stay strong for me, for us. Those simple words were my only lifeline during those dark, lonely weeks. The only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. Then one late night when I'd nearly given up hope, Ryland urgently called my phone. Julienne, come to my penthouse immediately. Right now. We need to talk. When I nervously arrived 30 minutes later, he looked emotionally devastated and physically drained, standing motionless by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city below. The investigation officially closed today, finally, he said without turning around, his voice flat. Sterling couldn't find any concrete proof of wrongdoing or policy violations. Relief flooded through me. That's wonderful news, but the board made a strict decision regardless. He continued, cutting me off. You'll need to be permanently transferred to a completely different department or, he finally turned to face me, his expression raw and vulnerable, or I officially claim you as my bonded mate publicly. My breath caught sharply in my throat. Claim me? I barely whispered, my heart suddenly racing. Yes, permanent mark. Formal bond. Everything that entails, he said intensely. But Julian, this is completely and entirely your choice to make. I will never force you into this, ever, regardless of what I want. I looked carefully at his vulnerable face, genuinely open for once, desperately hopeful yet terrified, but completely respectful of my autonomy and right to choose. and my decision was already crystal clear in my heart. I'd known deep down what I truly wanted since that first earth-shattering kiss, maybe even before that moment. "Claim me, Ryland," I said firmly without hesitation. His gray eyes violently flashed bright amber. "Julian, you need to fully understand what this permanently means. I'm ready and willing." "I've always been ready," I interrupted with absolute certainty. He crossed the distance between us in 3 long, powerful strides, cupping my face reverently in both large hands. "This is permanent and irrevocable. Once I mark you properly, we're bonded for life. You'll carry my scent always, my claiming mark visible. Everyone will immediately know you're mine completely." "Good," I said simply, meaning it with my whole heart. "I want everyone to know exactly who I belong to." Something in my absolute certainty seemed to break the last fragile threads of his iron restraint. He kissed me hard and desperately, all his careful control finally shattering completely. We stumbled blindly toward his luxurious bedroom, frantically shedding clothes along the way, hands exploring and claiming previously forbidden territory. When we finally reached the bed, Ryland paused, giving me one last searching look. "Tell me right now if you want to stop this," he said, breathing hard. "I won't stop," I promised breathlessly. "I want this completely. I want you forever." That transformative night, he completely and thoroughly claimed me. The possessive deep bite at the sensitive junction of my neck and shoulder, the permanent mystical bond that snapped powerfully into place between us like a living electric thing. There was initial sharp burning pain, but afterward came an overwhelming comforting warmth and deep spiritual connection that was indescribably beautiful beyond words. I could feel him constantly in my mind now, not through my secret ability but through the sacred mate bond itself. His emotions, his presence, an anchor I'd carry gratefully forever. When morning came peacefully with golden sunlight streaming through windows, we were permanently one, officially, spiritually, irrevocably joined. Ryland held me protectively in his strong arms, tenderly kissing my forehead, my closed eyelids, the fresh claiming mark on my neck. "No one can possibly separate us now, ever," he murmured against my skin. "Never," I whispered happily, genuinely smiling with pure contentment. I traced my fingers reverently over the matching mark I'd given him, smaller but equally permanent on his collarbone. We were true equals in this bond. Partners, destined mates. When Monday arrived confidently, we walked into the office building together publicly and immediately requested an urgent meeting with HR and the full board. Ryland's hand was firm and possessive on my lower back as we entered the large conference room, a clear, unmistakable statement of possession and partnership. "We're here to formally disclose our relationship status," Ryland announced calmly and professionally. "Julian Case and I are officially bonded mates as of this weekend." The room erupted in shocked murmurs and surprised exclamations. I saw Sterling's smug face drain completely of color, his confident expression crumbling into barely concealed fury and defeat. But the board members, after recovering from initial surprise, seemed more pragmatic. After all, bonded mates weren't uncommon in the corporate world and there were legal protections firmly in place. "Mr. Ashford, given these circumstances, we'll need to restructure the reporting relationship," the board chairman said diplomatically. "Mr. Case can remain with the company but will need to work to a different department head to avoid conflicts of interest." "That's perfectly acceptable to us," Ryland agreed smoothly. We'd discussed this possibility extensively, prepared for various outcomes. What mattered was staying together, not the specific reporting structure. As we left the conference room victorious, I caught Sterling glaring at us with pure venom, but honestly I didn't care anymore. His schemes had failed completely. We had each other publicly and permanently. Nothing else mattered at all. Ryland squeezed my hand as we walked. "No regret?" he asked quietly. I looked up at him, at this incredible alpha who'd chosen me despite everything, and smiled. "Not a single one."